Wait a couple seconds just for folks to start joining. Hi, everyone. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. As people are entering, I'll do a brief introduction just to get us started. My name is Nonye Alozie. I'm the Co-Deputy Director of STEM and CS at SRI Education. And today's webinar is part of a larger webinar series called The Future of Education in the Age of AI. And today's webinar is called AI Literacy Unplugged, Insights from K-12 Education Practitioners in the Know. Today, we're going to have 4 panelists from different sectors of education. But before we jump into our panelist discussion, I want to give a little bit of context about what we're talking about today. So, we all see it, we all hear it. AI is on the rise. It's becoming this important part of our everyday life, and it's definitely becoming more important part of education. What we do in the classroom, what we teach, what students learn. That means there's a case to be made about understanding what AI is. What does it mean to do AI? What does it mean to teach with AI? How does AI affect the learning process? And with that comes AI literacy. We know that AI is transforming many sectors of the workforce and education. And from this graphic about generative AI on the screen, we can see that the use of AI is very prevalent in our everyday. We see it in the professional space and in the educational space. The gray part of the graphic shows the amount of people that either have no exposure to generative AI or don't know what generative AI is at all. So based on this graphic alone, you see that many people are using AI in various tasks ranging from industry to education to the everyday. And with this growing use of AI in the modern world, it's important to understand what AI is. What does it mean? Is it ethical? Is it safe? And here at SRI, we've done a lot of work to understand what it means to be AI literate. We've synthesized our findings and created an AI literacy framework consisting of 5 components. First, we have understanding foundational AI concepts. Second, creating AI artifacts. Third, interacting with AI agents. Fourth, developing awareness of AI ethics. And 5, understanding human and AI relationships. We will send you a follow-up email where you can read more about these frameworks. But in the meantime, you can actually find a link to one of our recent reports about AI literacy in the chat if you want to grab that now and just get some reading done about it. But for today's conversation, we want to hear different perspectives from experts in the field about these different components of this AI framework. I think the components of the framework are pretty self-explanatory just in their name. So we won't go into depth about what they mean. So we'll just go ahead and jump into meeting our panelists. So today we have Gabrielle Kring, a high school English teacher from Sampson County Schools, Vera Cubero, an emerging technology consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Dr. Josh Ecker, the Learning Design Coordinator at Chester County Intermediate Unit, Dr. Juan Gutierrez, who is the Interim Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Pathway, and Multilingual Programs at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So thank you all for joining us today. And I actually would like to start our conversation, even though I gave a brief introduction of your title, I'd like for you to introduce yourselves in 1 or 2 sentences since you can do that best. And as part of your introduction, give a brief statement about the role you believe AI literacy should play in K-12 education today. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Gabrielle? A brief introduction and what is the role that AI literacy should play in education? You're on mute, by the way. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Kring. I have taught high school English for 7 years now. I primarily teach juniors, and so we focus on a lot of reading and writing. But I think that at my school, especially, we're a Title I school, low income, a lot of my students don't have access to internet outside of school, that teaching AI literacy is especially important within the school system to make sure that we're bridging any sort of educational gaps that are happening.
Thank you for that. What about you, Vera?
Hey, well, hi, I'm Vera. I am a long time educator, about almost 30 years in the public education, was a former teacher. And now I lead the work of AI in education in North Carolina. And I just feel really strongly that it does need to be infused throughout all curriculum areas, not just siloed in computer science or somewhere because of the equity issue. If we do that, we're going to miss a large population of our students, and typically those are the ones sometimes that are going to have the biggest hurdles already in life. And so I think it's going to really change the job market, and we're doing a disservice to our students if we don't infuse it throughout all of our curriculum areas.
Agreed. That's a really good point. That equity piece is really important. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, thank you. So, my name is Josh, and I work at Chester County Intermediate Unit, and my work there is really focused on the intersection of curriculum and ed tech, and AI is such a pertinent topic in both of those realms. So, it's really been at the forefront of my work recently. As far as its role in education, AI literacy, it's if our goal is to prepare students for their lives and set them up for success, then AI literacy has to be infused into the entire experience because it's infused into our lives. So I think it makes total sense to have it included throughout the curriculum in many different ways.
That's right. Last but not least, Juan.
Thank you. My name is Juan Gutierrez. Currently, I'm working at the University of Massachusetts, but previously I was employed by the state of North Carolina. I was working in Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools, and that was a very fantastic experience because I was able to be there when OpenAI went mainstream. So for me, it was like an opportunity as an educator, practitioner, researcher to start understanding how language development and the use of scaffolded AI in the classroom can actually be a very good point for the students with marginalized identities to be part of the curriculum, to access education, and to be have also to work with standards and also student-driven learning to make sure that everybody is successful and everybody has access to the curriculum.
That's right. Yeah, thank you all for that. I'm hearing different ideas here about the importance of AI in education, from equity to access to just having it infused in everything that we do, and setting children, students up to be successful when using AI. Um, so as we're getting into this conversation, I want to just mention to the audience that you can ask questions as we are having this discussion. You don't have to wait to the end. You can put your questions in the Q&A section there on your Zoom screen, and we'll take some time to address them at different points in our discussion as well as the end. So you don't have to wait to the end. So I'd like to actually kick us off with a short word association game about AI literacy and education, just to get our juices flowing and get the conversation started. So I'm going to ask you all 5 questions, and then you respond with what comes to mind first. So my first question, I'll start with you, Vera. Who taught you the most about AI? You're on mute. That
So
mute, betcha.
I would have said early on it would be Amanda Bickerstaff from AI for Education. When it first started rolling out, she was one of the only ones that was really putting out some good quality content, and so I followed her very closely.
What about you, Juan?
Well, this is very interesting because the very first person I listened to in a podcast was Vera Cuero. So that was very interesting to see back in 2023 how this conversation was starting, like having momentum and learning and finding an opportunity to work at the state of North Carolina and seeing how the state is getting ready to create guidelines. And it was just a moment for me to start getting involved, participating in multiple events across the state, creating policy at the school level, the district level. So being like an active participant and just being open for innovation and creation. So that was a very good moment. So yes, my very first podcast was with Vera Cubero, and that was a great point for me to see how the state was actually working to make sure that AI was accessible and willing and yeah, for everybody.
It's funny how it can be such a small world.
Yeah.
same panel now, and she was the first person who actually introduced you to it. What about you, Gabrielle? Who taught you most about AI?
It was actually also Vera. I joined an AI collaborative a couple years ago, and through that, she was able to, with DPI, arrange to bring in some speakers like Amanda Bickerstaff, and we were able to learn a lot about what AI is and its role in education.
What about you, Josh? Who taught you most about AI?
Yeah, well, I'm getting the sense I need to follow Vera on social because she's teaching people a lot of things, which is great. And to piggyback off of what Vera said, I would agree with Amanda Bickerstaff. To throw another name out there, Ethan Mollick at University of Pennsylvania. He wrote Co-Intelligence, and he has an interesting perspective. He's a professor, so he has the education perspective, but it's not necessarily the K-12 perspective, and also his approach to it is not strictly education either, which is interesting.
Here's my second question for you. AI in 5 years, is it overrated or essential? And anyone can start.
So,
Overrated or essential? Go ahead.
go ahead, Juan.
I would say at this point in the pace how things are happening right now, I would say it's going to be essential. And I feel like the most important thing is to have a human-centered approach to anything we do with AI, highlighting not only teachers agency, but also student agency, and try to leverage all the power that these large language models bring to the education arena. And I feel like it's going to be definitely essential for teachers, for administrators, for students, and even parents. So definitely, I feel it's going to be essential.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm definitely saying essential as well, same for some of the same reasons, but the advancements that are happening are just mind-blowing. And the impact it's going to have on the job market, it's going to be essential for our students to know how to work alongside AI. And so we have to, this dichotomy of a lot of schools still trying to find how to block it and how to detect it. And you can't teach them to work alongside it while you're also putting all your energy into blocking it and banning it and preventing its use. But I think it's essential for sure.
I would agree. I think it's essential when I think about, AI being, as big of a shift as just the internet in general. I don't know that as a society we did enough to prepare students with the digital literacy skills they need to successfully navigate the internet. So I think if anything, it's essential that we do more than we've done in the past to prepare students for this new technology.
I would also agree essential. I think we're already interacting with AI every day in multiple ways. And so it's really important that we teach students how to do so ethically and responsibly.
Which leads me to my next rapid fire question for you. What's the most common word you hear when people talk about AI? Anybody can jump in.
I'll start. Within the education, I hear a lot of my coworkers very concerned about cheating with AI.
Mhm. Mhm.
I second that one, and I also feel like academic integrity is like a couple words that are always popping up every time generative AI is in the conversation.
Yeah, I think that the whole academic integrity thing definitely is huge, but you also hear a lot of talk about human-centered, how to keep it human-centered.
Keeping that human in the loop type of thing.
And I would just add thinking about student privacy and student data, which, is in addition to what others have said, I think those are some of the big ones I've heard for sure.
Privacy, absolutely. My last rapid fire question for you is, what is harder, understanding AI or teaching about AI? Understanding it or teaching it? Anyone can start.
I would say teaching it because you have to deal with a lot of different attitudes and perceptions. And oftentimes and not, you hear more resistance than collaboration. So I feel like anytime you bring this conversation to any kind of scenario, there's always this resistance. So every time a conversation about OpenAI or any kind of AI tool is brought to the to the conversation, I feel like there's always that type of reaction. So I feel like teaching about AI, understanding AI could be a little more, there's definitely a learning curve, but I feel like talking about it and teaching about it is when you have to face the most challenges due to the resistance that it's widespread and it's very, very common.
Well, I think definitely teaching is harder as well, but understanding is integral to teaching it. And I think that it really takes a lot of interacting with it to completely understand it. To get to that fluency level, you have to kind of work in synergy with it for a long time and actually try out a lot of different things. And then that gets you to the point where you can teach people about it better. But you do encounter still some resistance, and that makes it difficult.
To piggyback off of that, I think understanding it well enough to teach it is a big challenge for me. I don't have a computer background. I have an English literature background. And so switching that focus and trying to understand how AI works and how it would look within my classroom was a big challenge for me.
Yeah, and I would agree that teaching is harder because I think, you have to understand it to teach it. But then when you're teaching it, it's beyond just conveying knowledge about it, right? It's teaching best practices and ethical use and all of these other layers on top of just kind of your baseline understanding.
It sounds like everyone thinks although understanding is really important in order to teach it, but the process of teaching, the practices behind teaching it is probably harder, and it's a very difficult thing to do, which actually leads us nicely into my first discussion question. Now we'll get into the discussion section here. How is AI literacy promoted in your classrooms? So let's start with you, Juan. You implement AI literacy into your classroom as someone who is in curriculum and instruction. You work with multilingual learners. What does it look like to implement AI from your perspective? You're in higher ed, right? You're in college level,
I
or
just started that position, but for over the last 3 years, I was in a middle school trying to implement and adopt all these systems, and it was definitely very interesting because in Chapel Hill, for example, we started with, well, number one, we started with the guidance that the state and NCDPI released. I think it was in um, May 2023. So we use that one as a reference, then go to at the district level to start persuading parents and the board of like to be part of these conversations, having focus groups. So start like from a top down perspective. But in my opinion, as a practitioner, I like to start bottom up, start with students, with the families, asking questions with the teachers, teaming up with other educators, with ELA teachers, social studies teachers to create plans that are going to benefit those students who are, let's say, underserved, or students who have had been traditionally in the margins of education. So with my multilingual lens, my multilingual perspective, myself being a multilingual subject in the United States, I feel like it's really, really important to create the infrastructure and the plans that are going to have a major impact for those students. So I feel like that equity lens is what definitely creates the buy-in that is required for collaboration. And once I bring these perspectives and start designing lesson plans and using specific tools to help students, let's say, craft an argument, or maybe just find the evidence and find the primary source. I'm talking about in the context of a U.S. history class. I was a U.S. history teacher, so bringing those things in my lesson was very fruitful, because students, no matter their background, even students who are very, very advanced in reading and writing, also those students who are still developing their English, were able to interact, to engage. So I was able to observe like in real life, how these tools are so powerful and how they definitely promote engagement. And it creates just that moment where all the students feel that they can learn. So that's the way I see it, and perfectly, crafting lessons that are going to be intentional, that are going to be standard aligned, that is going to create these very clear outputs for students to develop an idea, develop an argument, and also interact with historical figures. I just feel like that right there was a very powerful moment working at Chapel Hill.
Gabrielle, you work at the high school level, and you said you're an English teacher, and you don't have an AI background or a technology background. But you're here talking with us today about AI literacy. So, what does it look like for you to implement and integrate AI in your classroom? What does implementation look like for you at that high school level as someone who's fairly new to this?
So most of my students come into my classroom already having had AI apps in their phone, and they've interacted with chatbots. And so a lot of what we talk about is how to do so responsibly. We talk a lot about protecting your private information, how to use AI as a learning partner. We do a lot of lessons where we'll practice different sorts of prompts to see what kind of outputs we're getting. And so really AI literacy in my classroom revolves around teaching students how to use it as a learning partner rather than offsetting the cognitive load.
How do you all explain AI literacy to your students, right? So you're talking about, or just even AI, not necessarily the literacy part, just the AI component as you're trying to maneuver it in your classroom, you're trying to integrate it into your lesson plans. Juan, you were talking about you try to get that buy-in from the bottom up. You try to work with the families first, with the parents, sort of get that equity piece, get people involved that might be marginalized originally. How do you explain it to them, to students, to the people you're trying to pull in? What do you tell them?
Okay, so I feel like making sense of what technology can bring to the classroom and having a very thoughtful approach of how technology can be used to benefit society. But Vera already mentioned that the human-centered piece. So in my research, I work a lot with teachers' agency and student agency. That's kind of like the number one. Even before AI, I feel like agency is always a very important construct that we need to explore a lot more, especially now with generative AI. But I
Mm.
feel like making sense of what's going on and how these chatbots actually work, try to convey the idea that these are tools that are being programmed, that are being trained to act in a certain way and to produce outputs that are going to look in a certain way. It's kind of like the message that I always try to start with, especially with teenagers, with eighth graders who they are already digital natives. They already know how many things in terms of technology, but bringing that human-centered knowledge and trying to like it's just a tool, and we're always going to contest and we're always going to doubt and question and corroborate the outputs, trying to see that the human brain in combination with the AI tool could be an excellent partner. But the human brain is the one who's in charge of deciding what's valid, what is reliable, what it's not, what is a hallucination, like all these key concepts that teenagers need to understand so they know that they are the ones that really matter and their creativity is the one that's at the forefront. So yes, hallucinations, training, like all these basic key terms, I feel like are so important for um, teenagers to understand.
Josh, I'm curious about something. So you work with teachers, you work in PD spaces, right? You work with AI and professional development. So Juan was talking about the things he has to tell students, high schoolers, in order to get them ready for using AI. How do you explain AI to other teachers who might be thinking about using it or trying to, get them interested in it? What kinds of things do you say?
Yeah, so there are some analogies or analogous tools that teachers might already be used to that can be kind of a jumping off point for them to understand generative AI. So something, like the most basic version might be like an autocomplete, in a text message where it says, "Oh, is this the word you're looking for?" And we can think of some of the generative AI tools as very, very complex autocompletes, and that's just from a starting point, a way that we can jump in, and then looking at other tools like Grammarly and some of the other things that they might be familiar with already. So that is to use other tools as a jumping off point, I would say is where I usually start with teachers. And then when I'm working with them on using AI, on implementing it, I use a different analogy, thinking of it as maybe a student teacher or an intern of some sort, where, the output you're getting can be really high quality, but with, an actual human student teacher, they're still in the process of learning. You're there to verify and help ensure that it's at the quality that's expected. And, that's something that, in terms of resource creation, lesson planning, that's an analogy that I use with teachers.
That's great. I like that. And I know, Vera, you do a lot of policy work, and how do you bring this topic? How do you explain it at that level with, if you work with administrative, I know you work at a high level. Um, how do you bring this topic up? How do you explain it at that level for people? And you're on mute. That mute button, I'm telling you, it'll get you.
Sorry, the space bar is supposed to unmute, but it wasn't working. So, at that level, I mean, I think it's super important that people who are making policy and making decisions for schools do understand it, because this is a type of thing. It's not just a tool; it's way more than a tool, and so they're not equipped to make policy and make decisions for others if they don't understand it. So, I talk to a lot of like school board members and education leaders groups and things like that. And so I use some of the same type things that I would with teachers, but just trying to explain to them that AI has been around for a long time, that it's not brand new. When we say AI, most of the time people are talking about generative AI. So I try to make sure they understand the difference, that, the base word in there is generate, and generative AI is AI that generates new things, the text, video, images, audio, all of those things now, code. And I also try to kind of, because prompting is really important, and they need to understand that using it like you use Google, you're going to get substandard results. And so I try to explain how it's different from Google, that it's not just storing all this content that people have already created. It's not just going out and searching something that already exists, it's generating it brand new. And so I try very early on in any of my sessions to actually do some live prompting with them, because it's also not the type of tool you can understand without engaging with. And so I have them do just a simple prompt, like explain generative AI to me, like I'm a fifth grader. And then I have them follow it up with changing it some, like changing it now, changing instead of fifth grader to computer scientists. And then I'll have them follow up with that, say, now write me a rap song with it, for eighth graders. That's funny. And so that helps them to understand the human part of it, and how what you put into the prompt really changes the outcome. And so I walk through that prompting exercise with them, and have them change it several different times, and then I'll have them maybe have it translated into a different language. And so that really helps, I think, them to understand the power of it. And then when they do that, we first start with everybody doing the exact same prompt, and then I will share mine, and I'll ask if anybody in there has the exact same answer, and they don't. And that helps them understand also that it's not just regurgitating something from online, that it is based on that data, but it's pulling it into a new response every time. And so those are some of the things that I do to kind of help explain it from the beginning, from the very basic level.
I like that. I like that you sort of scaffold it up, and you start with like just prompting, and then you move them into actually creating things like songs, so they can see the different layers of that creation process that happens with generative AI, that it's still a very human centered process, and that, generative AI especially is not a person. It's a tool, it's a thing. That actually leads me to our next set of questions about skills and interacting with AI agents. Um, it's not uncommon to hear people talk about generative AI in particular as a person. They'll say, "Oh, I asked ChatGPT," as if that's their friend or it's a person, or "I asked Google, I went on the Google and it told me." So how do you help students and other teachers, if you do PD, if you work at the teacher level, at the district level, or administrative at the policy level, how do you help them be critical in evaluating the outputs and the recommendations that come from AI tools, especially generative AI tools? Let's start with you, Josh. You work a lot with teachers, you do PD. How do you help them um, critically evaluate? what they're seeing.
Yeah, I think part of it is that when we're doing training sessions, we build that into the time we have. So, generating an output, looking through it together, deciding as a group, what did it do well? What in the output looks good, what does not look good. So, really building that habit from the start. And then also having, whether it's teachers or any audience, generate some outputs on topics that they know very well. So that way they already have really strong background knowledge and they can then take that and apply it when they're reviewing the output. Because it's harder when you don't know a topic as well and you're getting, a response from any AI tool that sounds plausible, but it's harder to evaluate. So starting anyone who's newer to AI on a topic they know really well, and then building in that routine of evaluating over every time you generate an output or just every now and then, building the habit and starting them with something they're familiar with are the two I would use.
Reviewing the outputs, checking what it's saying. That reminds me of when I started using generative AI in particular, and I was trying to do a literature review, and it produced a lot of hallucinations of references that didn't exist. And if I didn't know to check, you would, put these references in your work that aren't real. So that process of evaluating and checking the work of the AI is so important. Um, I'm going to ask you, Gabrielle, as a high school teacher, how do you? I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you were talking about creating these songs with the students, and you take them through the scaffolded process. How do you help them evaluate what they're seeing and what they're getting from their AI tools?
So I teach a lot of writing skills, and we talk a lot about evaluating your source in general. And so whenever we're talking about AI, I do talk a lot about how they are responsible for whatever they are putting into their writings. And if they heavily relied on AI and it gave them a hallucination and they cite that in their paper, they're still responsible for that, that they are the human, they're in charge of that. And it's their responsibility to make sure that they're fact checking AI the same way they would fact check any other source. And we also talk about how a lot of AI a lot of generative AI don't give you their sources, and the internet's a big place with lots of opinions, and you can't be sure where that response is being pulled from. And so um, that's where we really do talk about using it as a learning partner, not as your sole source. You need to really critically evaluate what it's giving you and use that to generate more ideas and products that you might not have been able to otherwise.
Mhm. I really like what you said about being responsible for the things that come out, that you're still responsible for what is generated and that there are consequences attached to that, and how important it is to evaluate. Juan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that Gabrielle said. She's a writing instructor. I mean, she teaches a lot of writing skills. So in eighth grade in social studies, writing becomes a number one skill. Like students need to know how to put together an argument, find the evidence, the counter argument, that kind of thing. So being able to break down writing assignments into multiple steps, so approaching writing more as a process than rather than a product, I feel like mitigates a lot the risk that we have for cheating and all these type of like negative connotations that we have when using generative AI. So I feel like when students understand that writing is a process, like when you are brainstorming, you're using your brain first. And at some point in the writing process, let's say when we're doing the editing, the proofreading, that is a moment with crafted prompting and all that. Students can actually see the power of the literacy, how they can how they can make their own version a lot stronger, what's different. It's like very meta, like meta linguistic awareness is a very key component here. And I feel like being able to understand writing from that perspective and teaching that to students, so when they can use the AI in a very responsible way, when there is a purpose and when there is reflection after that, I feel like that is a very powerful moment. And that's something that I got to see being in eighth grade over the last 2 years.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Juan said, I do think that all of these new AI tools are making it more important to work with students on metacognitive, metalinguistic skills where they have a strong enough understanding of their own thinking, their own learning, that they understand where it might make sense to use AI and where it is a detriment to their own growth. And then also, if they have the skills, the metacognitive skills to articulate their own learning progression, then it also, it's one that gives us really good evidence of how much progress they're making. And two, if we're worried about AI for cheating or anything like that, having a student be able to articulate their own thinking and their own progress is a really helpful counter to that potential issue.
I love that you both brought up the metacognition, the metalinguistics as part of the process of using AI in in their learning trajectory. I mean, it's important. What I'm hearing you say essentially is that, which was actually mentioned earlier, that the AI is a tool. It's not a person, right? That it still has to be embedded in good teaching. It has to be embedded in good instructional practices that can help the students learn how to reflect, learn how to be critical evaluators of what they're seeing, what the outputs of these AI tools might be. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Vera, did you want to add something there?
Well, I was just going to second everything that they all said, but we also have a framework in our North Carolina guidelines that's also published on the AI for Education website. I work with Amanda Bickerstaff on how the every framework. And I just think it's really important, which these two teachers are rock stars, and I know they do this, but that teachers are modeling this in front of their students. And so the framework is an acronym for every, where you always evaluate first, evaluate for bias, evaluate for factual accuracy, and so forth. But then you engage with the model. That iterative prompting process of engaging with the model is what helps move people into the fluency level. And so it's really important that teachers are modeling that with students. And then the next part is editing your prompt if needed, revising the prompt as needed, or editing the output, and then revising it, putting in your own words. And then that last one is just making sure you remember you are responsible for it. And so I think as teachers, it's really, really important in the classroom as we introduce these tools that we remind students of that. But anybody who's ever been a teacher knows teaching at one time will not do it. You have to just constantly model and remind and reiterate. And that's how we build those skills in our students and teach them not to trust it exclusively, and to make sure that they are using their evaluation as and comparing it to other sources. As Gabrielle said, that's a skill we've been teaching them for a long time. But it's really important that we keep doing that. And I just also wanted to add to that, thinking about the writing and thinking about that both Gabrielle and Juan mentioned, in referencing Ethan Mollick again, he talked about a homework apocalypse, and that really is where we are. And a lot of people are not prepared for that. But our teachers, I was a teacher for 14 years in the classroom, and a great majority of what I did in those days, I couldn't do now if I were still teaching, because students could do it in a few seconds with AI. And so we have to start also reflecting more on that learning process, instead of just that final product. And so that, as one said, having the students talk about it, that's one of the best ways, no matter how beautiful or perfect the end product is. If they can't explain it to you and they can't talk about it, then the learning perhaps didn't take place. And so having them that metacognitive reflection throughout the writing process, having them, I'm a big proponent of portfolios, I always have been, but especially now, because it gives them a place to demonstrate their whole learning process, that whole messy middle from the beginning to the end. And we need to be evaluating that whole process, not just that end result.
Right. I love that. I mean, that really speaks to the idea that that's because we have these tools that are very smart and they can do a lot of things. It doesn't remove the teacher. I think that's always a fear, right? And so you're all pointing to these things that are so important when it comes to just the instructional piece, that's becoming some of those foundational things that are so important to teaching, like teaching students about reflection, metacognition, metalinguistics, that are part of the sort of the learning sciences of learning, are now going to rise up and become even more important. And we're not just going to be looking at what did they create, but you want to know, how did they get there? So it's going back to that checking their work in math class. You know, you want to see each step. Did they do this? Did they do that before you check not just checking the final answer of the problem. We actually have some questions from the audience. I want to take just a short break to ask the question of this question to the panel. So someone in the audience asked, how have your students been reacting to, and in what ways have they been adopting AI? And where do you see the most value in it? And anyone can jump in for that one. That's for all of you.
So I don't have a chance to work with students often. So I have one experience recently though that was very surprising in terms of how students what they shared about their feelings about AI. So through our educational service agency, we have a student leadership forum. So students from all of the districts we work with come to our building and just engage in discussion. And I came in to do some work with them on AI specifically. And the amount of hesitation and really skepticism was surprising and also I think a good thing, but definitely surprising because I think that I don't know if it's a generational thing. I think maybe techno optimism kind of peaked with millennials, and now we're at a point of, if you look at younger generations, there's a big push towards analog living and moving away from an all digital lifestyle. So I think that maybe that was a reflection of that. But I was definitely surprised with how mixed the feelings were about AI with the students I was interacting with that day.
My students have been pretty positive with AI, and I know Juan mentioned earlier the writing process. And so, a lot of times with my students, what I'll do is teach them how to use AI for more targeted support. So, if they have a question about a specific part of the writing process, if they're stuck in a research phase and they're having trouble finding articles, we'll talk about how to use AI to meet those needs. And there's different AI tools for whatever those needs are. So overall, I found that once my students understand it and they understand that there's more than just Snapchat AI, they're pretty receptive to it, and I find that they take charge of their learning more in the classroom.
Mhm.
Yeah, in my case, for I have another section of teaching Spanish language arts. So this is like an English language arts class, but we are reading books and novels in Spanish. So for these projects, students had to create a poster or like a message based on particular aspect of the book. But we got to work with plot, with theme, with all these like contextual cues, all these things that are very difficult for students to process. But then using the AI to kind of like guide the learning process and how we can uh, analyze a text based on these different elements. I feel like that was very helpful. And students who were struggling with theme, for example, which is a very, let's say, abstract concept for an eighth grader. So having that interaction with the AI in the prompts that I was able to provide to them, it was very, very insightful because they were able to understand and also create the images of the characters of the book. So that was a very nice, engaging um, activity that I had with the students, and they definitely see the value and going back and forth between, let's say, using the screens and using the AI tool, and then doing work on like on paper, just doing the more traditional thing, like having this balance between using technology and just doing work from scratch. I think it was a very powerful thing to have that balance with the same group of students in the same class, so they could see the value of both human original thought and also working along with these AI chatbot to generate ideas and also understanding complex and abstract topics like theme and plot and those things that are very hard to understand for 13-year-olds.
Hmm. Anyone else want to respond to that question about how students have been reacting to AI and
Well,
the
I
value?
don't really work with students either, so I don't have a lot of idea about that, just what I've heard. But, looking at some of the research and things, there's strong research that students are using it. And there's also some research from Common Sense Media that African American and Hispanic students are using it more. and they're using it in a wider variety of ways, which I think is really interesting and a kind of a positive thing. But my feeling is that it has helped. I was one of those shy kids that never wanted to speak up, and I know that a lot of those students also, a lot of teachers have reported that students are asking fewer questions because the students who don't want to speak up and don't want to ask their questions, if they have access to AI, they'll ask it there, and so they're able to get that immediate help. I just want to make sure that we don't, move away from human interaction. And so I think that even if they're asking their questions there, they feel more confident. And we just need to make sure as teachers that we pull them in and get that human engagement. I saw with the one-to-one initiative, sometimes I even saw in one case where a teacher was having an online forum, and while they were in the classroom, they were answering each other online. And I just think we have to be really careful that we also build in those human skills so that if they're sitting in the room from across from each other, they should be working together and collaborating, not talking to each other online. And so I think it's really important that we make sure we remember that.
That's actually really interesting that you brought that up because I really wanted to ask you all some questions about the human AI relationships that we're venturing into and navigating this space now. We're not just talking to each other. We have these machines now, these software programs that we have to now interact with at various levels. And I'd like to hear from you just to about how you see your roles evolving as AI tools become more prevalent in education. How do you see what you do as changing? And how do you feel empowered by some of these changes versus overwhelmed or afraid of those changes?
I personally believe that my identity as an educator has definitely shifted. I think um, Vera mentioned earlier that she couldn't do things that she used to do when she was in the classroom, and I feel the same. Like I feel like when OpenAI became when mainstream, I feel like my identity moved from being the instructor or the person who is designing materials and keeping track of growth to be more like I am designing a learning experience, like I'm being an architect kind of thing, like to see where in this lesson or with in this standard I can bring technology to make sure that all the students understand the concept and are able to apply it, and so I can so I'm able to assess as well. So I feel like yes, I'm moving more towards that direction, trying to understand that I am not necessarily an educator or an instructor. Is like I am constantly designing and making sure that students are getting a very positive learning experience across the board for neurodiverse students, for multilingual learners, even for AIG students, like academically gifted students. Those are also really, really benefited from these interactions. So yes, it's definitely shifted drastically.
I love how you've structured that too, that you've moved from sort of pushing out information to designing. And I think teachers always are designing learning experiences, right? You're always designing, but the way you're designing is a little bit different now. And the way you are
Absolutely.
positioned in that design space is a
Mhm.
little bit different now than it was before. I'm curious to know from Josh, how are you helping teachers with this evolution process with AI coming in? How do you help them feel empowered?
Yeah, well, I think one is going back to an earlier question, making sure they feel like they have a solid understanding of AI. So that way, when whether it's a use case that they have led in their classroom or a use case that maybe they weren't even aware of that comes up, they have the contextual information and knowledge to make a thoughtful decision about is this something that we want to continue, alter, whatever it might be. So I think that's a big part of it is making sure they have that strong background knowledge and feel confident in that. I do think also that AI is in some ways an opportunity to do something that I think many of us have been trying to do for a long time, which is to make education more student-centered, which is a theme that's come up, throughout this conversation. So if we think about, for example, like a competency-based approach that is more process-oriented and is not so bound by deadlines and due dates and sort of the end product, I think that approach, a student-centered approach, and helping teachers understand what that looks like and their role in that too, can really be empowering because, like Juan said, being a learning designer and creating those experiences, that is, uh, just as important, if not more so, than maybe what traditionally happens in the classroom as AI comes in more and more. So, I think framing it that way, helping teachers develop the confidence and the skills and the knowledge to run with that and design student-centered learning that can not just kind of survive with AI, but even flourish with AI is really, really important when working with teachers.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing in that student-centered piece. So do you think that in the design process, in these designing of these learning experiences, do you incorporate student voices in that process, or how does that student-centered piece come to play alongside with the AI experience? How do you bring those together? And that's for anybody. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and I think there are a lot of different use cases or ways to answer this, but one specifically is if we think about student-centered learning, each student really designing their own pathway through the learning process. AI can be a great support for that. The teacher will always be sort of the primary learning coach, but having AI tools there to help a student design their own project or design a rubric that combines student interests with whatever learning outcomes are, need to be hit in that class. Like those abilities for a student to use AI to help them self-direct their learning is how I see those two things coming together.
And I'll kind of jump in and add to that. I'm really leaning in heavily, and we as a state are kind of moving in this direction into the bringing back project-based learning, because as they both referenced, the student agency piece is huge. And with this homework apocalypse we've already talked about, we just cannot continue doing school the same way. We can't just put AI into this square peg of factory model of education where we're doing just, I don't want to see it that teachers are just making better worksheets or making them faster or quizzes faster, because the student experience needs to change as well. And I really feel like that project-based learning has always been a passion of mine for as long as I've known about it, which is, at least a dozen years. But it was very, very hard to do all that mapping with the curriculum and building all of it. And AI really makes that scalable now. So it really makes it possible because of, the teacher can bring their knowledge, their understanding, their nuanced understanding of their students and their classroom and their curriculum, and the AI can come alongside them with all of the research and the information that it has, and its ability to very rapidly map standards across and provide ideas and brainstorm with them. And those two together as synergy can really work on taking an actual standard from their curriculum, and they can do a prompt to ask the AI. I live in rural Western North Carolina. My students need to learn this standard. They can copy and paste the standard in. And can you give me some project ideas where they could use, solve real world problems in our community while still addressing the standards? Also break down the standard for me into skills and give me some skill-based workshops that I can do. And so you can really use AI and the teacher together to develop that and make it scalable now. And then, as I've already said, then that whole messy process in the middle, capturing that in a learning portfolio so that the students are demonstrating the whole process. And I really feel like that, as one said, becoming more of an experienced designer than the sage on the stage, coming alongside students and helping them. I feel like there's always going to be a place for some direct instruction, but that can be done in small group settings while the rest of the group is working on their own project that they have some agency in creating and designing. And I really feel like that's the direction we have to move in if we want our schools to stay relevant.
I love that. I love that you brought back project-based learning because it's such an intensive process to create experiences in that way. And I love that you're sort of bringing this idea of how AI can help facilitate those design processes. So I'd actually like to, as we're coming up against the hour here, I'd like to close with this final question for all of you. Um, so if you had to write tomorrow's front page headline about AI literacy, what would that headline say? And what kind of conversation would you like it to spark? You can chime in when you're ready.
Yeah, I can start. I think I would mention that AI should be introduced as a literacy initiative instead of a tech initiative. Because when you approach AI from a literacy perspective, I think like everything changes. The perspective changes, the attitude changes, because we are co-constructing here to make sure that the messages are clear, that the students are getting more involved, going back to the student-centered approach. I feel like bringing in more like an literacy initiative makes more sense than a tech initiative.
Love that. What about you, Gabrielle? What would your front page headline be?
I think it would be similar in that AI is vital for our students to know and understand and be competent in using. It's going to be a big part of the world going forward. And so, if we're going to prepare students for that world, then AI literacy is part of that.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so mine is related to both Gabrielle's and Juan's, and I'm thinking of it in sort of a clickbaity way. But my headline would be why AI literacy is more important than reading and writing. And I say that as a former English teacher. I don't
Oh,
know that I necessarily agree with it,
mhm.
but I would say that going back to one of the parts of the question you asked, what would I hope that generates in terms of thought discussion? I would hope that would, for some people, set off some alarm bells or at least some sirens saying, this is really important and it's not just something that will go away. It's not something we can shove under the rug. Whether or not you think it's more important than reading and writing, again, I don't necessarily think it is, but it is one of the most important skills that I think we will be preparing our students with going forward.
Thanks for that. And finally, Vera, what's your headline?
I would say, like again, trying to be clickbaity, I guess, but from classrooms to change makers, student graduate AI, students learn to work alongside AI to make the world a better place. Because I think that we really are at a pivotal moment, and as usual, things drop right in the lap of educators, and how we train our students is really going to have an impact on what they do in the future. And of course, the students are the future.
I love that ending. Students are the future. You just summed it all up there. Um, I want to just close with thanking all of you for being here today. We don't have any questions in the Q&A panel, so we'll go ahead and just I would like to thank the panelists for being here today. It's such a pleasure and honor to talk with you this afternoon, especially right before a long weekend. I'd also like to thank all of the SRI team for organizing this event, and those of you who are listening in the audience, stay tuned for an email that will come from us that will provide you with some of the information about this webinar, a summary, as well as some of the resources that we talked about. And I'm going to actually ask Vera if she could share that framework that she mentioned earlier with us, and we could share that with you as well. There will also be, I want to give a quick announcement that there will also be another webinar as part of this Future of Education in the Age of AI series. The webinar will be on August 28th. You see it on the screen there. It will be moderated by the New York Times reporter Natasha Singer, which is kind of cool. And it will feature Kumar Garg from Renaissance Philanthropy, Leanne DeLizer from SRI Education, and Fernanda Faber from Columbia University eLab. So please stay tuned for more information that will be coming your way, and be ready to register when you get it. Thank you all again for being here. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon and a great long weekend. And see you next time. Thanks, everybody.